Reindeer. If you ever wondered where the idea of Santa Claus's flying reindeer comes from, the answer might be in Siberia, in a reindeer running in mad circles over the snow. Arctic reindeer actively seek out the mushroom Amanita muscaria, that bright red mushroom with white spots that you have probably seen in fairy tale illustrations, digging under layers of snow to find it. After eating it, they run in erratic spirals, shake their heads violently, and separate from the group with an energy that is nothing normal. The mushroom contains muscimol and ibotenic acid, two compounds that produce intense hallucinations and are toxic to humans in high doses. But reindeer have a documented metabolic tolerance that allows them to consume them without fatal consequences. Shamanic tribes, Evenki and Sami of Siberia and Scandinavia, observed this behavior for centuries, and according to anthropological records, some shamans consume the urine of intoxicated reindeer to obtain the effects of the mushroom in a more filtered and less dangerous way. The body of the reindeer processed the most harmful toxins and allowed the muscimol to pass through, an animal running frantically in circles under the effects of a powerful hallucinogen observed by cultures that revered it as a spiritual figure in a landscape of white and infinite snow. The connection with flying reindeer is speculative, but it is difficult to completely dismiss it. Elephants. The African elephant weighs between 3,000 and 6,000 kilos, depending on the individual, which makes getting it drunk seem mathematically impossible. And yet, the scientific debate about whether elephants deliberately intoxicate themselves with fermented fruit from the marula tree has been active for decades and not fully resolved. Elephants seek out fallen marula fruit in an advanced state of fermentation, consume it in large quantities, and then behave with an unusual clumsiness for animals that normally move with surprising precision. They stagger, collide with trees, become vocal and sometimes aggressive without clear provocation. Marula fruit ferments to approximately 3% alcohol, and some researchers argue that the volume necessary to affect an animal of those dimensions is impossible to reach with fruit fallen on the ground. Others, however, point to recent studies that suggest that elephants may have specific genetic variants that make them significantly more sensitive to ethanol than other mammals of comparable size, which would considerably lower the intoxication threshold. What is clear is that the behavior is repeated and active. It is not accidental. Elephants know the marula trees return to them in season and compete for the fruit. If they are not seeking the effect, they are being very consistent in a very curious mistake. Birds. Every autumn, when berries ferment faster than birds can consume them, in Europe and North America, a wave of collisions begins that wildlife rehabilitators know perfectly well. Thrushes, starlings, and waxwings, also known as waxwings, consume rowan and holly berries in an advanced state of fermentation and literally lose the ability to fly in a straight line. Collisions with windows, automobiles, and structures multiply during these periods, and some individuals die from the impact. In Bohemia, Czech Republic, entire groups of waxwings have been documented found on the ground, unable to fly with their crops full of fermented berries. The phenomenon has a colloquial name in English, drunk birds, and although it sounds comical, it has real consequences for local populations. The difference with other animals on this list is that birds probably do not seek the effect. They simply find an abundant food source and eat to the limit, without a mechanism of self-regulation that stops them before intoxication. The result is the same. A bird singing at the top of a tree in September is more likely to be drunk than you imagine. Parrots. In the legal poppy fields of the state of Madhya Pradesh, India, one of the world's largest producers of opium for pharmaceutical use, farmers face a pest that does not respond to scarecrows, traps, or conventional deterrence methods. Rose-ringed parakeets, Psittacula crameri, attack the fields in coordinated groups with a behavior that farmers themselves describe as methodical. They fly in absolute silence toward the crops, completely contrary to their normally noisy and chaotic nature, as if they knew they must avoid being detected. They bite the poppy capsules before they ripen to extract the raw opium latex they contain, and then sit motionless on nearby branches for hours with their eyes half closed. The behavior was documented in reports by international media and widely covered in Indian publications. The parrots quickly learn to avoid any new deterrence method, which reinforces the idea that it is not a casual behavior, but actively sought and adapted with intelligence. An animal that normally does not stay still for even 30 seconds, sitting in silence for hours. If that does not describe addiction, it comes very close. Lemurs. In Madagascar, ring-tailed lemurs have developed a practice that primatologists classify in the category of self-medication, although with a component that goes far beyond the therapeutic. They bite and rub millipedes of the genus Psycholeptus on their fur with frantic and intense movements in a behavior called anointing or unction. The millipedes release benzoquinones and other toxic chemical substances as a defense mechanism, and when they come into contact with the lemur's skin, they produce intense salivation, facial expressions of apparent ecstasy, and an altered state that can last several minutes. The antiparasitic function is confirmed. The substances of the millipede effectively repel insects and parasites. But researchers point out that the intensity of the behavior, the fact that lemurs compete with each other for access to the millipedes and that they pass them to one another as if it were a valuable resource, suggests that the psychoactive effect is not an accidental byproduct, but part of what the animal is seeking. Benzoquinones produce documented neurological effects in primates. The lemur knows what it is doing. Horses, locoweed, the plants of the genera Astragalus and Oxytropis that grow in the grasslands of the western United States and Patagonia. It is one of the few cases on this list where one can speak precisely of real addiction with documented physical dependence. Horses that begin to consume it repeatedly develop withdrawal symptoms when access is removed. Movements in circles, loss of coordination, unpredictable behavior, and progressive weight loss that continues even when they have food available. The active substance is swainsonine, an alkaloid that inhibits lysosomal enzymes and causes cumulative neurological damage in brain tissue. With enough exposure, that damage is irreversible. Ranchers in the American West have lived with this problem for centuries, and annual economic losses due to crazy horses and livestock are in the millions in states such as Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado. The plant has flowers that range from purple to white, depending on the species. It is visually harmless and grows abundantly. Affected horses are colloquially called loco horses and are recognizable from afar by the way they move, as if the ground beneath them were not completely real. Frogs and bufo toads. The bufo toad, known scientifically as Encelius alvarius and native to the southwestern United States and Mexico, produces in its parotid glands two of the most potent psychoactive substances known: 5-MeO-DMT and bufotenine. 5-MeO-DMT is estimated to be between 4 and 6 times more potent than classic DMT. In wild environments, some small mammals have been observed repeating the behavior of licking or biting the toad voluntarily, which suggests active seeking of the effect. But the most documented case occurs in domestic environments. In Florida and in Australia, where the bufo toad is now an invasive species, veterinarians have specific protocols to treat dogs that have licked toads and arrive at clinics with severe disorientation, excessive drooling, seizures, and completely dilated pupils. The cases are frequent enough that public first aid guides for pets exist. Some dogs repeat the behavior deliberately after the first exposure. The toad does nothing to provoke it. It simply exists, and that is enough. Dolphins. In 2013, the documentarian John Downer filmed for the BBC a behavior that generated immediate debate in the scientific community and headlines around the world. Bottlenose dolphins, young, passing a pufferfish from one to another with striking delicacy, biting it with calculated care so that it would release small amounts of tetrodotoxin, the same toxin that makes fugu potentially deadly if it is prepared badly. In high doses, tetrodotoxin blocks sodium channels and kills. In microdoses, it appears to produce a mild anesthetic or psychoactive effect. After manipulating the fish, the dolphins floated near the surface in a state of apparent contemplation, with their mouths slightly open for several minutes. What makes this case especially significant is not only the behavior itself, but what it implies. The pufferfish was deliberately passed between individuals, which suggests a learned behavior and socially transmitted within the group, not instinctive. Some scientists dispute the interpretation of the contemplative state and point out alternative explanations, but the precision with which the dolphins controlled the dose is difficult to explain as an accident. The liana Banisteriopsis caapi, the base plant of ceremonial ayahuasca that Amazonian shamans have used for centuries in religious rituals, contains harmine, tetrahydroharmine, and harmaline, all MAO inhibitors with powerful neurological effects. In the Amazon rainforest of Brazil, Peru, and Colombia, jaguars have been observed chewing and rubbing the leaves of this same liana, followed by behaviors that include dilated pupils, slow and fluid movements, and an apparent sensory hypersensitivity. According to Amazonian shamanic tradition, the knowledge of ayahuasca was not discovered by humans, but directly observed in the behavior of jaguars, which are a central figure in the spiritual system of multiple cultures of the region. This narrative is cultural and cannot be scientifically verified, but the behavior of the jaguar with the plant has been reported by field researchers in the area. The specific pharmacological documentation on the effect of MAO inhibitors in jaguars is scarce, and Banisteriopsis caapi alone produces sedative effects. But not the visions associated with complete ayahuasca, which requires an additional source of DMT. What the jaguar experiences exactly remains precisely and unknown. Wallabies. In 2009, the Attorney General of the state of Tasmania, Laura Giddings, declared before the Australian Parliament something that generated headlines around the world. The wallabies were breaking into opium poppy fields and then appearing running in circles until collapsing. Tasmania produces approximately 50% of the world's legal opium intended for pharmaceutical use, and its fenced fields are a regular target of wallabies, kangaroos, and sheep that learn to overcome the barriers. The post-consumption behavior is consistent. The animals run in increasingly smaller circles until they lose balance and lie on their side. The most curious detail, and the one that went around the world, is that the circles that the wallabies trace in the crops are visible from the air and resemble the famous crop circles, the mysterious patterns in cereal fields that for decades fueled theories about extraterrestrials. The parliamentary statement of Giddings is in the Australian public record. The mystery of the crop circles of Tasmania has a much more prosaic explanation than visitors from space: capuchin monkeys. Capuchin monkeys, with some of the largest brains in proportion to body size among all non-human primates, have been documented in Venezuela, Brazil, and Costa Rica, participating in group rubbing sessions with plants of the genus Piper, and in some cases with millipedes in a behavior that researchers call anointing. What distinguishes capuchins from other animals on this list is the completely social dimension of the behavior. It is not an individual consuming something in private, but entire groups in frenetic sessions where the animals rub each other with the substance, vocalize with increasing intensity, and actively compete to participate. The compounds of Piper include piperine and amides related to capsaicin with confirmed antiparasitic properties. But the intensity of the social behavior and the active search for repetition lead researchers to classify it as self-medication with deliberately sought secondary effects, not as an accidental consequence. Capuchins are the same primates known for using stone tools to crack nuts. The intelligence that allows them to manufacture tools is probably the same that led them to discover that certain plants change how you feel. Black bears. The American black bear weighs between 90 and 140 kilo, depending on the region and sex, which makes its intoxication threshold significantly more attainable than that of the African elephant. In the state of Washington, park rangers found a black bear that had access to campers stone was cooler and consumed 36 cans of beer, with a documented and consistent preference for one brand over another, leaving the cans of the less preferred brand practically intact. The bear was found asleep next to the remains. Apart from this specific case, black bears regularly consume fallen apples in an advanced state of fermentation and fermented wild oats, with post-consumption behaviors that include extreme drowsiness, disorientation, and a notable reduction of the instinct to flee from humans, which makes them dangerous animals in that state, not because of aggressiveness, but because of unpredictability. Unlike elephants, the mathematics here works without the need for debate. 36 cans of beer for an animal of 130 kilograms does not require special genetic variants to explain the result. Cats. The domestic cat is probably the only animal on this list whose relationship with a psychoactive substance is studied with the same depth with which human addictions are studied. Nepentolactone, the active compound of catnip nipetacataria, activates opioid receptors in the feline brain and produces a state of euphoria that lasts between 5 and 15 minutes, followed by a refractory period of approximately 30 minutes, during which the cat does not respond to the plant no matter how much is offered. Between 50 and 70% of domestic cats present this response: intense rubbing, vocalization, salivation, and a state of visible ecstasy that does not resemble any other feline behavior. The remaining 30 to 50% lack the specific genetic receptor and do not experience any effect. What makes this case especially interesting is that the mechanism is not a product of domestication. Lions, leopards, and pumas respond in an identical way, which confirms that the receptor evolved millions of years ago in the common ancestors of all current felines. Nepentolactone probably evolved in the plant as an insect repellent. That it also produces euphoria in cats is, from the plant's perspective, completely accidental. Salema fish. The sarpasalpa, known as salema fish or golden salema, is a silverfish with golden stripes that lives in the Mediterranean and the coasts of the eastern Atlantic, and that has the unenviable distinction of being the only fish documented as a cause of hallucinations in humans after its consumption. In 2006, 2 cases on the French Riviera were reported in medical literature. People who consumed salema prepared normally experienced intense hallucinations that included screams of animals, visions, and disorientation that lasted several days. The responsible substance is not completely identified, but it is associated with toxic phytoplankton that the fish consumes and accumulates in its tissues, with potency that varies according to the season and the region. What makes salema a unique case on this list is the inversion of the role. Here it is not the animal that seeks a substance to alter its state, but the animal that is the substance. According to classical historical sources, the Romans knew the fish and used it for recreational purposes, although the academic verification of this specific practice remains a subject of debate among historians. A completely ordinary-looking fish swimming in the Mediterranean that can send you into several days of hallucinations. The sea keeps strange things. If you want to see more, click on the video on screen now. M.